Alright, I guess it's time for me to show you how I'm growing these chili peppers in hydroponics with like minimal effort. The idea is that the plant is growing its roots partially in the air and partially in a nutrient solution. So a common issue with houseplants is that you overwater them and then the roots rot. You don't really have that problem here because always a portion of them is exposed to air, so they can't they can still breathe, which is otherwise done with like the cyclical watering cycle or something like that in regular gardening, which seems to me like a much more like difficult, like a pain in the ass. So that's why I'm doing this. It's a lot less maintenance. I can check this like once a week, at least once you have started saplings, basically. What I'm using is this. These are like 600, 700 milliliter jars, pickling jars, really cheap. These net pots. This is kind of janky. I'm not sure I'm really happy with the solution. I think what people usually do is that they make a lid. I mean, they take a lid and they drill a hole into it and put in the small net pots. And yes, the big net pots are way too big. They're unreasonably big. I don't know why. Yeah. So I have to make these adapters out of cardboard. That's really annoying. It's actually like the most time-consuming thing about starting starting something. I will show you, but sadly you can't see that the seedling was started in a block of this fibrous material for insulation, like insulation rock wool. You can get rock wool that's designed actually for planting. Is called Grodan. I'm gonna write the links to a lot of these things in the description. It's really cheap, so it's like probably a couple of cents for a piece that you need for one plant. What I did is that I was inspired by a video where they didn't use like a whole block that's for saplings that's like this big, and only cut each of those up into tiny bits and then put those in the net pots with these clay pebbles, just ordinary clay pebbles, also called like perlite. And you can see that this specific plant is just growing like sideways. I think that's because the block probably moved inside the perlite. Probably not optimal. It's not very important. So I guess I should start at the beginning, which is how you start these as seedlings. I'm not actually starting from seedlings. I mean, I'm starting from seeds, and this is how I started some seeds, but most of them I started in a box. This is called, I think, like the wet tissue method or something like that. It's as simple as it looks. This is even the bag from some of the seeds. You just put like a tissue that you fold so that it's 2 layers, and you really saturate it with water, but don't have any water just sloshing in there, and keep some seeds in there, and just eventually at room temperature they will sprout. Do not put your seeds to sprout on a radiator or something like that. It can they will basically rot really fast. Like by the time they're out of the seed breaks and the cotyledon, the fake leaves sprout. The fake leaves will be rotten, and you don't want that to happen. However, I think this plant had a rotten, moldy cotyledon. So the dead part, I just picked it off. And it just took longer to start. But you should really avoid that, because I'm pretty sure this one, I was starting it as early as this guy. So it just really stunted its growth. Like it had like a delay because it was dealing with half of the starting leaves, basically. This is a habanero pepper, this one is Scotch bonnet, this one is jalapeno, and the others are cayenne. The major difference between them on how to grow them is that these two, the Scotch bonnet and habanero, they are a different, what do you call it, genus? I don't know. The second part of the name is different. It's Hinens and not Annuum. And that changes the way that you take care of them a bit, and the way that they grow. Basically, they will have to grow into big bushes, while these pepper varieties, they don't really have to. They can be kept basically this small. And also, to keep them small, I've been picking off these tiny leaves that start, because when you pick off these, they can still sprout in the lower parts. For example here, and really get twigs to the side, just to be strong and bushy, because they are trying to maybe grow towards the light, because they think they're in a canopy that gives them shadow, but that's not the case in my living room. You can see that I have this light mounted on here, not the best setup, but it works. This is basically just a breaker box that I made. This is a fuse, power plug. This is a really cheap, net neutral white 36 watt light, as cheap as it can be. It's about 3 times as cheap as grow lights, and actually it's too powerful to run it 24/7. You can absolutely use, at least with chili peppers, you can use your lights, run them 24/7. The plants will work just fine. However, what I saw is that the leaves would curl up and droop a bit, because they would grow into the light, but very close to it. And you can see that I really need to raise this, or I will reorganize this. So too much light can be bad, but if you're using added light, it's pretty hard actually to, as long as you leave some space. Peppers are tropical, they really want direct sunlight, and just your regular room light is not going to cut it, basically. Let's talk about nutrients. The plant is constructed from the carbon in the air, and it makes sugars and fiber out of that, and also the minerals that are present in the nutrients. This is my nutrient solution, which I made from dry powder, basically. What I'm aiming for is currently about 500 ppm of nutrient. The nutrient I chose is a really cheap dry one. I'll show it later. And you can calibrate its strength with an electroconductivity meter. This also, the one that I have, also measures pH, acidity. So because ideally the nutrient solution is not neutral but acidic, I'm using a pH down powder. This one that I have is urea sulfate. You could use almost any acid, but sulfuric acid and sulfate is popular. Also phosphoric and those organic ones, I forget what they're named, humic acid, for example, because humic acid is natural. That's what you get when you have composting, when things rot. But also sulfates and phosphates, they're just naturally occurring. So because the water that I get, I just use tap water. I don't use rainwater or buy reverse osmosis water. Because the tap water I have is even slightly basic, I treat it with this, and the dosage is really it's really tiny. Since I already talked about the jars, I should probably talk about why I'm shading them like this. This is to prevent algae growth. If you have algae growth here, it can lead to your roots being covered with algae and rotting away, which would be very bad. So ideally, you don't want any light coming into it. And what I've discovered is that these milk cartons, 1 liter milk cartons, they because they have an aluminum layer, the aluminum is 100% light impassable. It's just opaque. So you can, as long as you cover the top with foil or something like that, you really probably won't have that problem. This is the nutrient that I use. It's a brand that's like Central and Eastern Europe, probably everywhere. It's just the most basic thing that you can get almost. I mean, this one is specifically for blooming and fruiting stuff, but I use it as a general one because it has a good balance of nutrients for growing peppers and such. So this is 15530. That's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and that's 15%, 5%, 30%. Then it lists what the other components are, which is really good. That's really good. Whenever you see some proprietary formula, I mean, it can be good, but you don't know what's actually in it, right? And it's a single. It's not a two-part mix. I'm going to be adding some calcium-based nutrient to it as well later on to prevent some problems with like the fruits rotting. But for now, this is I think that this is a really good balance. If you can get something similar or something maybe that's even targeted for ideal for hydroponics, because if you get just general nutrients, fertilizer, if you get fertilizer, the point of fertilizer isn't really for hydroponics. It's to enrich existing soil, and that soil already has some basic nutrients that's assumed always. So the plant is not going to really be living off of purely that, right? So you want something that has a good balance of that stuff. Also, it's not very true that when it's growing like the green stuff, the vegetative growth, that you need mostly nitrogen. That's not true. It really depends on the plant that you're growing, and it's not just nitrogen. It's usually that you mostly want to add nitrogen to existing soil, I guess. Anyway, when you're adding stuff, it's different. So you should really look into the specific plant that you want to grow and what its needs are. But still, something general, it's probably going to work. This is where I started most of my plants, and it's kind of a mess because I haven't opened it in quite a while. And these are the blocks that can like hold your seedlings. However, because I just cut them so small and didn't really push the seeds into them, for example, this guy just grew out of it. So you can just hold it like this, and what a cute guy. Ideally, I would somehow get the roots fixed in it's like sandwiched in between two pieces of it. But I guess the best way is just not to cut up the blocks into these super tiny things. Even though it works, you can just basically crush the root or something, and it's just not very nice to handle when you're like putting in the perlite into the nut. But anyway, you can just keep this closed for days at room temperature. It will work. Be patient. Don't open it once a day. That way the air will be dry. It gets really humid in there, and the seeds really like it. The same with the bags, the wet tissue method. It gets just like 100% humid, just saturated, and it's perfectly fine. Just be patient when you're dealing with the seeds. I should get back to talking about the nutrient solution. So I said the strength that I aim for is 500 ppm, which means 500 parts per million. So I have this solution which is like diluted but like 50 times, and I forgot the ratio. But this is diluted, and then I dilute this further to actually create this nutrient mix, and the final strength is what I measure with this, and it can measure. I get this from AliExpress, quite cheap. Now it's measuring microsiemens per centimeter. This is electric conductivity of water, and now it's measuring ppm, which is the amount of dissolved stuff in the water. And basically the ppm is it's not accurate all that much. It's approximating from the electric conductivity of the medium the approximate amount of the total dissolved solids, because they change the electric conductivity. And all it measures is, you can see that it just has two metal things that measure electric conductivity, and then this pH sensor, which I have no idea how it works, but it works. Also, it has like a temperature probe. There's this tiny thing, because it needs to calibrate against the temperature of the medium to get the precise values. So I aim for 1 millisiemens per centimeter. That's actually what I'm aiming for. That's how Dr. Kratky, who's the Kratky method, which is what I'm doing here. That's the guy behind that. I mean, he didn't invent all of that stuff, but he wrote about it, and now it's called after him. He has a wonderful YouTube channel, by the way. It's just delightful. So he recommends 1 millisiemens per centimeter for peppers until they start blooming, then 1.5, and then when you're harvesting, when they're like really like ripening and you're harvesting them, go for 2. And as the water evaporates, it kind of, the solution can get stronger, because the water is not just getting into the plant with the nutrients, but also evaporating. So it's basically like reducing. So you need to sometimes, like every couple of days, every week, check it with your EC. And what you want to do with the roots is that first, when you're starting, the net pot with the plant needs to be, the bottom of it needs to be like submerged a bit, because the block of the growing medium that you're using is the green rock wool that I showed. It needs to be getting wet like a wick from the nutrient solution, until you get roots that go into the solution, that grow down. And at that point, you want to have a good portion of them always submerged. So here I have like less than half of it submerged, and the rest is in air. I could really add more water. Don't add a lot at a time, because it will basically adapt the upper parts to be air roots and the bottom parts to be water roots. I also have this fan, because when the plants get bigger, they can be a bit fragile. So as they get bigger, they would break if they're weak, and you have to use string to bind them to take some load of that. And if you're growing it inside like this or in a greenhouse, you should have a fan that is on a couple of hours a day. I have this timer for that, from 10 to 5 every day, which blows on the weakest setting on these saplings, so they just wave a bit, and that way there is some stimulation for them to grow stronger. The idea is that because I've been growing these two for 2 months now, that they should start blooming soon. Hopefully I will get a better setup than this, because it's taking up a lot of space like this. I want to get some furniture that will have the light mounted vertically. I'll see how that goes, because it's just, I don't really have how to mount the light high enough for these guys. It's just taking up too much space. So yeah, the idea is that the The pepper plants can from like 3 months or like 100 days after the seeds sprout, they can give you fruit or start blooming or something like that. So that should happen fairly soon. Hope to update you about that then. See you.